When I first started this work, I was super afraid of future stuff, for the obvious reasons, right? Like, I was afraid of, first of all, being labeled like a psychic. Like, I think there was just that feeling that like psychics are kooks and like, and they're crazy. And I was afraid of being that. I was okay with like using my intuition to see like what wasn't able to be seen presently. Like, I was okay to being like, oh yeah, like you're very afraid of this because your dad said this to you when you were little. So like I was okay with going into the past. And I was okay with like talking about the present. But when future stuff started coming up for me, I was like really afraid to share it. I was just like afraid to kind of, I was just afraid, I thought. And I also was just afraid of like the responsibility. Because like how many times have you been to a reading, you heard something great, and then you're just kind of like, you might not know it, but then you like wait around for it to happen. And I didn't want that situation. But at some point they were just kind of like dropping in. So I feel like when you're starting to do when you're starting to wake up your intuition, future stuff may it may take a little bit of time for you to get comfortable with it. Some of you, like, that's how your intuition probably has worked for a while. Like, some of you might have like memories of like just knowing that something was going to happen and it happens. So some of you might be a little bit more like, I do see that some people are like a little bit more naturally future oriented. I was not. I was like naturally more just can pick up things like that people weren't talking about. But the future information started kind of dropping in my lap after I started practicing readings and practicing my intuition. But again, some of you are going to just be like naturally um, future telling ish. So, um, sorry, I was just kind of seeing the chat. So that's something to kind of consider, and just know that the truth, like about when you start getting future information, the best way to handle it is to feel like unattached, and again to have that natural curiosity. So just always being like being curious about it and just being like, oh, this is so interesting. So because it's kind of same like other parts of your intuition, it is a muscle, and not even a muscle, but it feels to me almost like the more you speak it and the more you give it like attention, the more it starts to come. But if you get a few of these like intuitive hits about the future and you don't really like share them, or you don't give them too much attention, I feel like you get less of them. So once I started to see those happen in my reading, I was like, I'm just gonna like drop them and be a little unattached to it and see if I get more of them. And if you're, one is like when we're reading for ourselves, which I'm going to talk about for a second, but then let's say you're like reading for somebody else. It's important to kind of let them know that you're not attached to it either. That you're like, I don't know. I get, it's all in the way you deliver it. It's like, I get the sense that this may, it seems like this is going to happen. It seems like, so you're kind of just like, we'll see, you're just kind of like dropping it lightly. And the same way when you're predicting for yourself, just being like, huh, interesting. I feel like this is going to happen in January, and you drop it. Like when you get like attached to it and you're like, oh, I know this thing's going to happen in January. And there's a part of, and it's so hard, you guys, because that there's such a, like a, just like a very fine line between being attached to information and being unattached to information. And sometimes you think you're being unattached, but you're so on the border of being attached that it messes things up. So, um, a big part of your future prediction being correct has everything to do with how unattached you are, unfortunately, because future information just by so future so okay, when you're pulling future information, basically what you're doing is you're going into this like web of possibilities, and you're pulling a possibility that like nobody has like really seen. You're grabbing it, you're observing it, and like you're speaking into it, which therefore or you're speaking about it, excuse me, and therefore you're already messing with the future. You're messing with it actually coming to be because you just observed it. So it's kind of like an example would be, have you ever seen like those reality shows where they follow a fam, like let's say like these, those shows where like I don't know, the couple has like 7 children or something, those reality shows, right? And they're following the story of like how hard it must be to have 7 kids or whatever, or the like 7 whatever they're called. And you're watching the show, and the first 2 seasons, you're like, oh, okay, like this is so hard. These poor people, they're struggling. And by like season number 3, they're like driving up in an Escalade, right? Like, because what happened is that like us observing their life actually changed their life. You get what I mean? Where if we didn't observe it, then that's like the most natural state of the unfolding of their lives. So the future, does that make sense, guys? So the future is kind of the same thing, that actually if we didn't touch it, it would like naturally kind of like come to be. But sometimes when you touch it and you observe it, you can you can mess with it like naturally coming to be. So that's like the trickiest part about predictions and pulling predictions. And that's why the trick is learning the art of like being unattached. The and when you know you're unattached is when you forget, honestly. So when you pull something up and you're like, oh, seems like this is going to happen in January. Maybe easier forgetting is when you read for somebody. You're like, oh, this seems like this is going to happen in January. And then February comes by and the person calls you and they're like, oh my gosh, you were completely right. This thing happened. You were like, what did I say? You were so, it's like you were so channeling the information and just kind of pulling the information that you even forgot you said what you said. So that's a true example of like being unattached. And then now for your own information, it is this feeling that like you see it and you're like, oh my gosh, so interesting.